Hello and welcome to the Fantasy Life Show, Week 12, Waiver Wire Edition. How quickly time flies. I'm your host, Ian Hartitz. It is a great day to be great, and it is a great day to, again, break down all the waiver wire goodness ahead of Week 12. Only 3 more weeks until the playoffs, everyone. Get your minds right. We are trying to get those lineups ready to, just get another 12 months of being able to make fun of our closest friends and family. That's what fantasy football is all about at the end of the day. So we got the man in the house to help us achieve all of that, though, the one, the only, Matthew Freedman. And Freedman, as much as waiver wire stuff and fantasy football is cool, you have a pretty interesting situation going on ahead of Monday Night Football regarding a pretty great round robin parlay. Do you want to elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, so we have the game model at Fantasy Life, and it's been doing really well lately. This past weekend, it absolutely crushed, and it had 8 bets that really identified as ones that were showing value based on the rating system we have. 6-1 on those bets. And now I did the round robin parlay waiting on the Raiders, and it hurts my stomach. I want to bet out of it. If I want to hedge, cash out, whatever. But if the Raiders hit, I'm going to be a very happy man because that will make it the best NFL week I've had in probably the past 5 years or so.
Isn't it just sick that potentially one of the best gambling weeks that you've had is going to come at the expense of your Cowboys? Like it's gotta be a little bit of a moral dilemma you got going on, Freeman.
It's just in keeping with what it is like to be a Cowboys fan. And Ian, you would know this. You are a Cowboys fan. Dwayne, a Cowboys fan. It's just, of course, like we can't have anything perfect. It's always going to have to be at a cost of our souls.
I'm actually a fan of the emotional hedge, although I do wonder if that actually is starting to influence real life outcomes. I think the biggest singular bet I ever hit was last Thanksgiving. Just obviously the Buckeyes have had a lot of trouble with Michigan. And I just thought to myself, like, would making, $100 on a plus whatever money line odds Michigan was, like, make me feel better if we somehow managed to blow that game. It did not, Freeman, but I was able to afford like a new kitchen table there for Mrs. Hartitz. So again, a situation where even if we are going to be sad in real life, maybe we could be just, a little bit better in the bank account. As someone once said, a bit more comfortable to cry in a Mercedes than on a bicycle. So keep that in mind. Best of luck to Mr. Freedman. But with that, guys, let's get into the meat of the show. It is time for our DraftKings opening lines. A slate of NFL football just happened, which means there are plenty of injuries to get through, starting off with a season ender for Falcons quarterback Michael Penix. Most likely this is what is going on. He suffered a knee issue. There is apparently a bone bruise and knee sprain aggravation, and also there has been damage to the ACL. So again, we'll see the whole thing. He's getting a second opinion, but it does sound like IR is immediately on the table, and Kirk Cousins will again be taking his place under center in place of Penix. So bad news there. Hopefully Penix, again, someone who has just dealt with so many knee injuries already, will be able to get help. Boom. Also at quarterback, we got the Gents benching Justin Fields for Tyrod Taylor. Let's face it, not the most surprising thing in the world. Wasn't a very good performance last Thursday night, or really the entirety of the season, especially when it comes to throwing the football. Kind of a big part of playing professional quarterback, as we all know. That said, guys, wouldn't exactly expect a 180 from this Jets passing game. We do have to remember that without Garrett Wilson, this is probably the single size excuse for a wide receiver room in the league. Tyrod Taylor has been under center here for about, a game and a half or so this year. Dead last in net adjusted pass yards per attempt. This is a fancy way of, again, incorporating touchdowns, picks, and sacks into raw yards per attempt. So things continuing to not look good for the Jets. Things could be looking a little bit better for the Pittsburgh Steelers, though. We obviously found out Aaron Rodgers dealing with that small fracture in his left wrist. However, per Ian Rappaport, actually a 50-50 chance that he's not going to miss any time and could be ready for this week. They're just undergoing some additional tests, one to see if he can further injure himself, can he grip a ball, things of that nature. Also note Giants quarterback Jackson Dart and Texans quarterback C.J. Stroud remain in the concussion protocol. Do not seem like they are necessarily safe bets to be starting this week. Over in those running back streets, good news for Packers RB Josh Jacobs. His injury is not major. Test today confirmed there's no structural damage, and he is considered week to week. So hasn't been ruled out for Sunday just yet, but Freeman, I do tend to think they'll be safe with him. Emanuel Wilson, someone we'll be talking about later, would be the next man up. So as much as Jacobs is an awesome running back, as I love some of the stuff you do, Freeman, in terms of points against the spread, also have your projections up every single week. I don't think we'd be looking at the Packers saying like, oh my God, this offense goes from good to horrible just because Jacobs happens to miss a week.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have a feeling we will probably talk about Emanuel Wilson in a little bit, but I think he's one of those handcuffs that we've kind of had on, I won't say the back burner, but like in the back of our brains for like the past month or so, to where it's like he's not having standalone value now, but he has the potential if Josh Jacobs gets injured to take over the backfield. And hopefully people who have been listening to various versions of the Fantasy Life show for the past couple of weeks already have Emmanuel Wilson on their roster, because if they don't, he's now going to be much more expensive to acquire.
As we always say, only thing better than getting the waiver wire pickup of the week is already having them safely chilling on your bench. More running back news. Bucs RB Bucky Irving still dealing with the foot and shoulder injury. However, per head coach Todd Bowles, he will be worked in more during practice this week. So he was limited all 3 days last week. If we do happen to see a full practice come to fruition, maybe could be on track for Sunday night's game. That said, because it is of the Sunday night variety, we do need to keep in mind that, again, need to be sure before we are again going throughout the entirety of Sunday and expecting Bucky to start. Same goes for Chris Godwin trying to come back from that fibula issue. Again, we should know more as practice participation rolls in throughout the week. Over in the wide receiver streets, Drake London, unfortunately, guys, considered week to week with a PCL sprain in his knee. He's out for at least week 12 per Ian Rappaport. And again, sounds like it could be of the multi-week variety. So more targets for Darnell Mooney, Kyle Pitts, Bijan Robinson in the interim. Also, no 49ers wide receiver Brandon Ayuk will not be designated to return from IR. And Bills tight end Dalton Kincaid is starting off the week listed as a DMP with a hamstring injury on their estimated practice report. So not looking good for either. Freedman, again, not necessarily a spread mover, I wouldn't think, because that tends to just be quarterbacks or maybe the most impactful defensive players. Think Myles Garrett and guys like that. However, Eagles all-pro offensive tackle Lane Johnson, unfortunately, is expected to miss 4 to 6 weeks with a Liz Frank injury. I'm guessing, Freedman, if we had to have a list of the top 5 or 6 most impactful offensive linemen, Lane Johnson would be on it.
Yeah, there are essentially only two right tackles who matter. One is Penei Sewell and the other is Lane Johnson. And of course, they played against each other last night. Well, in theory, they did. But Lane Johnson is certainly someone who actually does matter for that team. And for an Eagles offense that still isn't functioning at peak capacity and isn't really facilitating anything for the pass catchers, it certainly is something that does not help matters.
And then finally, the Bengals defense, just, already horrible. And now they could be even more horrible because cornerback Cam Taylor-Britt, with his own Liz Frank injury, is expected to miss the rest of the season. Also, Trey Hendrickson still considered week to week, and he is considered doubtful for Sunday as he continues to work his way back from the hip and pelvis issues. So enough of that, guys. Got some ads to do, and then we'll get into our waiver wire goodness. This has been our DraftKings opening lines. Shout out to our friends at DraftKings. Big games, big moments, and even bigger upside this week. I teamed up with DraftKings Pick 6 to give you, a scholar, a new way to get in on the action. With Pick 6, you can ride the upside by making simple predictions. Will players score more or less than the numbers listed? Stack your picks together, and the more you hit, the bigger your payout. And right now, guys, there's an incredible offer for new customers. Play $5 or more, and you'll get $50 in Pick 6 credits. That's right, new DraftKings customers play just $5 and get $50 in Pick 6 credits instantly. So don't miss your shot to ride the upside. Download DraftKings Pick 6, get on all the action, and sign up using my promo code FANTASYLIFE. Thanks to DraftKings Pick 6 for sponsoring this to make this NFL season one to remember. Who's awesome? Huel's awesome. Huel actually produces a no-prep, fast, nutritious, plant-based meal that does not compromise your health, guys. As someone who routinely is trying to just get through my lunch without having to waste a ton of time, but also not trying to be too just non-healthy about it, I really do love Huel and their 2 meal replacement products in particular that have really been helping me, again, avoid skipping meals or feeling bad about eating something quick and crappy during the day. Their ready-to-drink options include all sorts of tasty flavors. I actually got chocolate peanut butter right here, my personal favorite. I've been pleasantly surprised at how full I've actually stayed for hours even after drinking it. So again, looking at some of the benefits here, we got 35 grams of protein, 6 grams of fiber, 27, not 26, 27 essential vitamins and minerals, no added sugar, also gluten-free. And guys, under $5 per meal and ready to go in this economy, no less. So again, fantastic stuff there. There's also their daily greens drink, which for someone who despises the existence of vegetables like me, really is a game changer to stay healthy, but actually be quick about it. I can confirm this does taste better than some of that green powder and stuff that, I still have in the morning as well, but just my personal preference. These are actually developed by registered nutritionists and dietitians. They contain 42 vitamins, minerals, and superfoods, only 25 calories, 4 grams of fiber, and get this, 1 singular gram of sugar. So yeah, guys, Huel makes healthy eating simple. They also just launched in the Target stores nationwide. Try both products today with 15% off your purchase for new customers with my exclusive code FANTASYLIFE at www.huel.com/fantasylife. Use my code and fill out the post-checkout survey to help support the show. Again, that's www.huel.com/fantasylife. It's the Waiver Wire Market Watch presented by Pristine Auction here on the Fantasy Life Show, going over the big 3 options that there's a good chance will be on your waiver wire, and accordingly letting you guys know how hard in the paint you should go to try to acquire their services. So Freedman starting off with the man we briefly touched on, Packers RB Emanuel Wilson, still only rostered in 8% of Yahoo leagues. So he was one of the more under the radar handcuffs, and part of that was the reality that we hadn't seen a game without Josh Jacobs. So while we assumed Emanuel Wilson would be the next man up, we weren't necessarily as positive as with guys like Tyler Algier or Brian Robinson or whoever. But based on what we saw post Jacobs' injury, Freedman, I'm more confident than ever that Emanuel Wilson will be the guy if Jacobs is to miss any time.
Absolutely. I think that there are 2 types of handcuffs that you want to roster during the season, especially as you approach the playoffs. So the first are guys who, if the starter is injured, that guy will now be the starter on a top 8, maybe top 12 offense. But a guy who is in an other situation is if you have a running back who has a pretty good chance of being a 1-for-1 replacement for the starter in terms of utilization. And with Emanuel Wilson, I think we have a shot at both of those. So it's a pretty exciting situation.
Again, don't even know if Jacobs is going to be missing many time, if any time, actually. So it could be, a moot point here. But it is a matchup against the Vikings this Sunday. That certainly seems winnable enough. And again, just given the fact that we've seen nothing from Chris Brooks throughout the year, Marshawn Lloyd is back in Green Bay. We confirmed he was spotted at practice working off the side last week, but still not exactly an imminent returnee from IR. It really is looking like Emanuel Wilson will be the guy. So I will say, again, every league is different and stuff. And we are at the point where, I know we're not all exactly dealing with completely full FAAB wallets. But given the fact that Jacobs could be back as soon as this week, or if not, soon thereafter, I do not think this is an unload the clip sort of moment necessarily to try to get Wilson on your roster. So again, probably something more in the 15-20%. It's week 12. If it's a must-win game, and you just need a running back this week to fill a bye, I get it. Maybe you can go a little bit heavier. But again, we're trying to save the 100%, 80% sort of FAAB bids for someone who we were a bit more confident in will have that role for the rest of the season. Something that also probably doesn't apply to Kenneth Gainwell with the Jaylen Warren situation going on, Freedman. So haven't exactly gotten an update from Jaylen Warren just yet. We just know he suffered that ankle injury, came back in for one singular play, and then did not play the rest of the game. So as we talked about on the recap edition of the Fantasy Life Show, Gainwell was already starting to have a bigger role even before that injury came to fruition. And unlike with Wilson, we don't even really need to wonder about if he's going to have this future role, Freedman, because as we remember back in London, I believe it was 9:30 a.m., Jaylen Warren a late scratch, and all Kenneth Gainwell did was come in and dominate, racked up RB3 worthy numbers overall in the day. So a situation where we've been gushing about Jaylen Warren and this backfield schedule moving forward. Kenneth Gainwell, again, maybe not someone to blow 100% of your FAAB on, but just getting my early ranks together, man, he's going to be tough to keep out of the top 15 should Jaylen Warren be sidelined.
Yeah, the great thing about Kenneth Gainwell is that we know he can do it as a pass catcher, and that is a really big factor. And then with Jaylen Warren out, and it's funny, I will say, Jaylen Warren said after the game when talking with beat reporters, I could have returned. He said that, I believe, while holding crutches, or at least while having his foot in a boot, which feels like real kind of Monty Python injury of it's just a flesh wound. I could have returned. If a guy is in a boot or walking very gingerly on his ankle, I just kind of assume he's going to miss the next game. And, that puts Kenneth Gainwell, given the skill set that he has, the 3-down skill set that he has, in a really advantageous situation, because I do think he could be pretty much a 1-for-1 replacement of Jaylen Warren. And because the guy after him is Caleb Johnson, who really can't challenge him the way that Gainwell can challenge Warren, that means that Warren could be Gainwell could be in a really great situation where he gets much more work than we would have expected for Warren to get. So, man, Gainwell, I'm not saying like you empty the clip on him because, again, we don't know how long Warren is going to be out, but we do know that Gainwell has the potential really to be a strong one-for-one replacement.
Again, you guys can check out very shortly after our editors get done with it my way too early week 12 rankings right up on fantasylife.com for free. I have Jaylen Warren just assuming he's okay, because that's how I'm starting the week as my RB15. That's ahead of guys like Breece Hall, Travis Etienne, Emanuel Wilson, Aaron Jones, and guys of that nature. Again, we like Jaylen Warren. It's a good matchup against the Bears. I think it could be a situation where he experiences a nice little boom game. I wouldn't even cross him out, though, and put Kenneth Gainwell there. I think without Warren in the picture, we can actually feel better about Gainwell than we actually do with Warren when this backfield is fully healthy. So, Freedman, just looking at it now, my running back, 8 through 14, James Cook, Saquon, Rico, Javonte, Kyron Williams, Ashton Genty, and Quinshon Judkins. I think there's an argument to actually put Kenneth Gainwell all the way up into the top 8 alongside Travion Henderson and Chase Brown because he has that pass catching gene that you're talking about, man. Obviously, James Cook and Saquon, Javonte Williams, I get it. They've been playing great football this year, but just with Gainwell, man, there's 20 carry and then 8 target upside on the table here. So it's probably a moot point because you guys are starting them regardless if I rank them RB14 or RB8. I get it, but there is legit every down explosive pass catching upside here, man. I'm excited about it.
Yeah, certainly. As you mentioned, the upside is there. And if Warren is out, you're almost without a doubt starting Gainwell, unless you're, in a 4-team league, a guillotine league at this point, and it's super loaded, right? But you are starting Gainwell, and you're doing it with your confidence, knowing that you have already seen him do really well in relief of Warren.
And again, to be clear, I'm excited about it from Gainwell's perspective. We don't want any of these injuries to happen, particularly someone like Warren, who has been playing awesome football this year. I actually talked about this stat a couple of weeks ago, but, not supposed to say bad words here, but cool stuff, is what I'm calling the metric. And basically, guys, it's an RB's total touchdowns, explosive plays, and tackles avoided divided by their total opportunities, carries, and targets. So if Saquon Barkley rips off a 50-yard touchdown run and breaks 3 tackles along the way, he racked up 5 cool things in one play. So looking at that, guys, the running backs with the highest percentage of cool stuff happening per opportunity: Jonathan Taylor, Jahmyr Gibbs, Omarion Hampton, Kenneth Walker, and rounding out the top 5, Jaylen Warren himself. So not saying it's necessarily predictive of fantasy points moving forward or anything like that, but just, again, wanting to give a testament to Jaylen Warren, who just has been an awesome tackle breaker. He's been jumping over dudes. He's been trying to jump over dudes and stiff arming. I don't know if he's just been hanging out with Darnell Washington all the time, has him feeling some type of way, but really has been a fun year for Warren. I do hope he gets better soon. So I'm with Freedman. Again, not unloading the clip on Gainwell because we don't have reason to believe right now that Jaylen Warren's going to be out of the picture for a long period of time. But if he is, it's definitely going to be Kenneth Gainwell's season. And with all this said, Freedman, I get so annoyed that we have to try to make some of these determinations on Tuesday afternoon, on Tuesday evening, before we even get the first practice report of the week. Waiver wire Wednesday, the alliteration, it's right there. What are we as a fantasy football community doing?
Yeah, I will say, and I hear you, I agree. I do think there might be a little bit of edge where if people can get a jump and they have a stronger sense, maybe because they listen to the show or, they do their own research, read the articles we have, whatever it is, maybe people can actually have an edge in knowing, hey, this guy is likely to play, this guy isn't likely to play, even though it's Tuesday and they have that lean already ahead of the injury report that comes out on Wednesday. Maybe it actually benefits people who are a little bit sharper, but I do hear you. I do like having that extra information on Wednesday.
I made a trade in my home league last Tuesday where I shipped off Marvin Harrison Jr. and Sam Laporta, and now my entire friend group is convinced that I somehow knew about their injuries early, and I did this without good intentions, which I would never do. I would never do that. Maybe I did it. I swear for real, though, I did not do it. And yeah, if we would have had the waiver wire moved back and the injury reports, it would have been a moot point. Finally, though, Freedman, one other big waiver wire pickup of the week, and this is actually big because we do have, again, a handful of buys going on, so I know some of you are going to need to fill in a quarterback, and I do not think there's a better option than Cardinals QB1 Jacoby Brissett. So obviously completed an NFL record 47 passes in 60 minutes of action on Sunday during that loss to the 49ers. But even before then, guys, he really has just been racking up fantasy fantasy points. Since week 6, which was when he took over as the Cardinals' full-time starter, the only quarterbacks with more fantasy points, Jackson Dart, Josh Allen, and Joe Flacco. Something about having a first name that starts with the letter J, I guess, in those quarterback streets. But look, they're airing the ball out. They got these banged up running backs. And just even without Zay Jones and Marvin Harrison Jr., it didn't stop Jacoby from putting up big numbers. So we'll see if Marv gets back in action. We'll talk about Michael Wilson's big day a little bit later, I should say. But Freedman, Jacoby Brissett, someone that right now going into the week, man, I have ranked as my QB 14. And, he's behind guys like Joe Flacco, Baker Mayfield, Brock Purdy. Like, if you wanted to press me and say he should be higher than them, who am I to disagree?
Yeah, he is absolutely ripping the ball right now, which is how aggressive he is at throwing it downfield. And it feels a little bit like the Joe Flacco situation from a couple of years ago where Flacco comes in and he's just airing the ball out, passing for 300 yards every game. And it's like, this can't last. There's no way that this lasts. But I mean, what we have seen from Jacoby Brissett, and Dwayne talked about this on the show yesterday, what we have seen out of Jacoby Brissett is a dude who's passing for over 300 yards, and he has 2 touchdowns passing in every game. Like, that is just a kind of unreal thing that is really sustaining this Cardinals offense. And, maybe it really helps Marvin Harrison when he comes back. I know he has played much better with Brissett at quarterback than he has with Kyler Murray, which is an unfortunate indictment on Murray and his failed lack of development to this point in his career. But Jacoby Brissett has been really intriguing. I do have to say, though, it feels like after this matchup with the Jags, he has a pretty tough run of opposing defenses with the Bucks, Rams, Texans, and Falcons in the 4 weeks after that. But then week 17 going against the Bengals, that, like, if he survives to week 17 going against the Bengals, he will be like a top 6 fantasy quarterback that week. Like, it will be impossible not to have him ranked at least in your top 8. And so I'm almost dreading it because I don't want.
It could be a situation in that game too, where Trey McBride is literally the number one player overall in fantasy. He's pretty much already been that guy since Jacoby has taken over. Looking at wide receivers and tight ends on the season, we know Trey McBride is the tight end 1 overall. He's actually would be the wide receiver 7 overall as well on a per game basis. And just since week 6 with Jacoby, no wide receiver has scored more PPR points per game than even Trey McBride. So it's not just that what he's doing is special at tight end. It really is incredible, even independent of the positional designation. So I know it's not a complete layup of a matchup. We have a Jaguars defense that honestly did make Justin Herbert and company look very mortal. We were talking on the show about, again, the Chargers only having 135 total yards of offense. That was their lowest single game mark since 2003. So great performance from Jaguars. They've managed to force a lot of turnovers, but it's also a situation where let's not be too big of prisoners of the moment. Previous to that game, we saw Matthew Stafford throw for 5 touchdowns against these guys in England. We saw Geno Smith throw for 4 touchdowns and Brock Bowers go absolutely nuclear. Even Davis Mills had that comeback thrown for 292 yards and a pair of scores as well. So again, might not be pretty, but let's face it, we've kind of seen that over the last 2 weeks against the Seahawks and against the 49ers. Jacoby has kept his foot on the gas and continued to rack up fantasy points for both himself and Trey McBride. And for that, Jacoby, we do thank you. So again, still available on, over 66% of leagues in Yahoo. He is my recommended QB streamer of the week. Freedman, if I had to go ahead and just kind of give some honorable mentions, because let's face it, Jacoby's not going to be in every, league available. I think Bryce Young coming off that performance, played well. Hopefully that ankle's not in too much of a problem. He's set up well against that same 49ers defense. We saw Jacoby do well. And then also Tyler Shook coming off the bye. I thought he actually looked pretty good before that. And it's a situation where he's facing the Falcons defense that has been more good than bad, but I just worry with some of those injuries that they're kind of approaching the point where players start kind of looking to plane tickets to Cabo. So Bryce and Shook behind Jacoby for me. Any other streamers you like, Freedman?
No, those guys sound good. Totally agree with that.
And as always, guys, although Kendall Valenzuela could not make it today, her waiver wire article remains very free and live on fantasylife.com. So I appreciate her giving a shout out to our DST recommendation from a few weeks ago. So let me remind you to do just that. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, everyone, are the DST you should be picking up for the playoff stretch. You do not want to start them this week if you can help it. Not the end of the world necessarily for 1 week, but they get the Rams here in week 12. After that, the Jacoby Brissett-led Arizona Cardinals, the Tyler Shough-led New Orleans Saints. We got got now the Kirk Cousins-led Atlanta Falcons. I mean, that was already a good matchup. Now it's even better. Followed by the Carolina Panthers. And in week 17, the Miami Dolphins. Sign me up for all that. Again, before their bye, they were already the DST2. Got a lot of playmakers on that side of the ball. And it's just the right, combination of them being good in real life, a great schedule, and also still very much competitive and fighting for a playoff spot. So keep all that in mind as you are approaching the waiver wires this week. With that said, guys, I did want to give some love to our presenting sponsors over at Pristine Auction. And boy, do they have a fun deal for you. We got a Jackson Smith-Njigba signed Ohio State football. Go freaking Buckeyes. Remember that time he went for over 300 yards in the Rose Bowl? I watch it every single night before going to bed. But yeah, now available on Pristine Auction. You can find this and so much more cool memorabilia on their site. We have a very special code for you guys to help save you a few doll hairs along the way. You can actually use code FANTASYLIFE when you win an item to receive $25 off at checkout, and first-time users can register using code FL20 to get $20 in credits added to your account over at Pristine Auction. So again, ideally, you are a first-time user. Use code FL20. You'll get $20 in your account. Buy your first item, then use code FANTASYLIFE, and when you win an item, you receive $25 off at checkout. I was not a math major, but I believe that is $45 off in total, only at Pristine Auction. Went through the three biggest names on the waiver wire. Again, Kenneth Gainwell, Emanuel Wilson, and Jacoby Brissett, but Freedman, handful of other wide receivers in particular, as well as some handcuff running backs that we also wanted to point out because, as we know, people got flexes to fill during bye week. So I want to start things off with one Alec Pierce coming off the bye in the Indianapolis Colts offense that was starting to ride the struggle bus a little bit those final 2 weeks. Daniel Jones taking a lot more sacks, falling back to earth just a little bit. But man, with A.D. Mitchell with the Jets now, and honestly, just with there not being a big-time field stretcher elsewhere on the Colts, Alec Pierce, Freedman, someone still only rostered, and let's see, 48% of Yahoo leagues, looking like someone who could potentially help us out down the stretch.
Yeah, Alec Pierce has been someone that he's gotten gradually better each year of his career. And last year, I think it was kind of underappreciated that he had like 800 yards receiving. Like he actually ended up being a pretty decent producer on that offense. And then now, even though that Colts offense spreads the ball around, and even though it still has Jonathan Taylor, so they don't need to pass all that much, they've got one of the best running backs in the league. 48% share
Don't need
in
to
air
pass the
yards,
ball.
just absolutely unreal. And then a 30% end zone target share is what we have. And Alec Pierce leads the team there. So he really is kind of the number one wide receiver on that team in terms of the utilization.
Led the team in receiving last year, and as you mentioned, did not get enough credit for doing so, and just really hasn't gotten enough credit for making the most out of his opportunities, really throughout his entire career. So right now, leading the NFL with 20.9 yards per catch. He led the NFL last year in that. The three previous winners to lead the NFL in that, George Pickens, Jalen Waddle, and Deebo Samuel. So again, I know we haven't had a ton of touchdowns. We finally got the first one, I believe, in Germany before they actually went to their bye week in the first place. But on the season, guys, I mean, we're talking about 73 receiving yards per game. That's the ninth best mark in the NFL. I mean, look, these are the wide receivers with it better, okay? JSN, Puka, Drake London, Jamar Chase, George Pickens, CeeDee Lamb, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's it. That's an incredible comp group. And as much as Freedman, like people might, put out that meme of, the soldiers and the one clown hanging out there, I disagree with it. I think Alec Pierce is far from a clown, and we're going to see that very much come to life here in free agency when he gets absolutely paid here in a few short months, maybe back with the Colts. We will see what happens. So Alec Pierce, someone where, again, just kind of looking ahead to this week, I have him inside my top 30. He is ranked as my wide receiver 25, actually on that borderline, ahead of guys like Tez Johnson, the Packers wide receivers, Jordan Addison, among others. So I'm still giving Michael Pittman the benefit of the doubt for Freedman, but it is getting much, much closer between those two.
Yeah, absolutely. It is very close between those two. Pittman, I think, has the higher weekly floor. Alec Pierce, as the boom bust guy in that offense, certainly has the higher weekly ceiling.
Moving on, we got Christian Watson available in 66% of Yahoo leagues. Hasn't exactly been dominating targets in these first 4 games back. He's had 4, and 5 targets, but 2 touchdowns, and honestly just been making the most out of his opportunities. 13.8 yards per target this season. That only trails Kayshon Boutte among all wide receivers with at least 15 targets. So it's a small sample for this season, Freedman, but I think the biggest thing is just we've seen this dude come back from the bad knee injury, look healthy, and hey, throughout Christian Watson's career, he has been a big play threat. So Jaden Reed should be back at some point in Green Bay. That could complicate things. But in the near term, Christian Watson looking very much like a boomer bust wide receiver 3.
Yeah, I mean, he's another version of Alec Pierce. Since he's been back in the 4 games, he's number one on the team in air yards, number one on the team in end zone targets. I mean, he's inconsistent, but he's the number one wide receiver on the team right now. And who knows if that sustains? He could obviously suffer an injury. Jaden Reed could return. They rotate in very aggressively in the Packers wide receiver room anyway. But right now, Watson is the guy that I want moving forward. And we've seen in the past, whether it's the past month or the past couple of years, the pure playmaking upside that he possesses. And if things somehow just kind of go right within that offense, where maybe he bumps up from a 76% route rate to an 85, a 90% route, and they realize, hey, this is the guy that we actually want on the field all the time, man, he could actually really become a fairly legitimate and consistent wide receiver one.
Someone who also should be, flirting with a much bigger route rate here moving forward. Falcons wide receiver 2, turn wide receiver 1, Darnell Mooney, guys, available in 69, very nice percent of Yahoo leagues. And again, without Drake London, at least for this week, potentially longer, it does seem like Mooney's going to be asked to do more. I understand. We were all hurt. I was hurt too. All right. I remember matchup. London ends up being, pretty much a late scratch on Saturday. And we even didn't have Michael Penix. So like looking back last year at the Kirk Cousins Mooney connection, it did seem like there's potential for Mooney to boom, and he did the absolute opposite of that. So that was a horrific game. I get it. But just Freedman, again, sometimes I think it can be more helpful to look at these players just kind of like wiping away their names and just trying to look at them as, data points on a piece of paper. We have a number one wide receiver and an offense with a quarterback who, sucked once a week ago, but I think we can agree is a top 30, 35-ish thrower of the football on the planet, and an offense with really nowhere else to go. Like, that's what we're talking about Darnell Mooney, and he's on the waiver wire right now. So no, I'm not going to be ranking him inside my top 10 this next week, but right now, man, I have him as my wide receiver 32, and I think that's arguably even a little bit low, and maybe I'm being too worried about those demons. So Darnell Mooney, man, maybe not going to win your league, but he could help.
If there's one guy who has the potential to be this week's Mike Wilson, right, to do what the Arizona Cardinals wide receiver did last week, like seemingly coming out of nowhere and putting up 180 yards, it's Darnell Mooney. Like, this is a guy who has had strong seasons with multiple different teams. He at least has some sort of prior connection with Kirk Cousins. All the time. And if you look at the air yard percentage, he has 30% of the team's air yards over the past 5 games. Compare that to Drake London, who's at number 38. He actually really could be a very high boom or bust wide receiver one in terms of production at the end of this week. Like, that is within the range of outcomes. He could also be a guy who has like 2 receptions for 20 yards, right? Like, he could absolutely destroy your team if you put him in the starting lineup. It just kind of depends on what you need. But Mooney has upside this week that is as high as anything that you will see out of someone who's not like in your very clear top 8 wide receivers.
And again, guys, it was last year, and I know we're playing fantasy football in 2025 now, so I'm considering all that, believe me. But weeks 1 through 14, which is just all but one of Kirk Cousins' starts, Mooney had the 9th most receiving yards in the NFL, and Drake London was right behind him in 10th. So again, it was very close, but we aren't that far removed from seeing Mooney do some big things. And again, with no London, at least for this week, going to have every opportunity to hopefully have a better performance than we saw in that Miami game. One more wide receiver. This one actually is pretty big because we saw a nice utilization jump last night, and that is going to be Luther Burden. Freedman, a situation where Olamide Zaccheaus seemingly has finally been bumped down the depth chart. So we now have Roma Dunze, DJ Moore, and the electric rookie Burden here filling out things for Caleb Williams. So honestly, Burden's made the most out of his opportunities all season long. He's number 1 among rookies in terms of yards per route run, in the top 3 in targets per route run with guys like Tedero McMillan and Emeka Mbuka. And again, all that nerdy, stupid stuff aside, this dude just looks special, man. You put the football in his hands. He looks fast. He makes other fast defenders not look as fast out there. Like Luther Burden, man, I just love watching this dude actually get the football. I recognize that this is an offense that, middle of the pack, above average in terms of passing yards per game. There's no guarantee that Burden's going to be even a top 3 weekly option, but we've seen booms from rookie wide receivers in the second half of the season before. I do think Burden has what it takes, Freedman, if we can get some, decent enough weekly opportunity.
Okay. I'm going to say a name that maybe isn't really all that comparable, but like Jahan Dotson, I don't know. It feels like Luther Burden could be a good real life player, but because of the offense that he's in, because of the guys who are ahead of him, because they run a little bit more than we might want to facilitate production from a number 3 wide receiver. I still think even if he's really efficient with the opportunities that he gets, Luther Burden isn't really going to be all that fantasy viable for people who are actually competing for a championship. So, like, I see the enthusiasm, and if he does something in the second half of the season, it might feel a little bit like what we saw out like Jahan Dotson his first year, where it's like, okay, that's like something that we can build on, and then it maybe just ultimately goes nowhere. But I'm not really all that enthusiastic about Luther Burden, just given the offense he's in and given the guys who are ahead of him.
So again, given those 4 big names, Alec Pierce, Christian Watson, Darnell Mooney, Luther Burden, I personally, in terms of who I want on my, just neutral team moving forward, Alec Pierce would be my number 1. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit more than you. I'm going Luther Burden number 2, and then I would want Darnell Mooney, and then Christian Watson probably comes in the 4. I just think Jaden Reed coming back, and it's just a situation where, yeah, like we hope he makes the most out of 5 targets per game, but that's just asking a lot. I don't see a situation where Watson becomes this like must-start wide receiver down the stretch. So I would go Pierce, Burden, Mooney, Watson. How about you, Freedman?
Okay. I think our lists are going to be pretty different. I would have Watson and Pierce very close together. I might give a slight lean to Watson, but Pierce is right there with him. And then I would have Mooney because we have seen him do it before. And I think he's just in a better all around situation. And then I would have Burden as a very distant number 4.
Fair enough. Wet blanket Freedman trying to. I'm the one actually pushing back on the rookie love, but you know how the turns have tables here, as the great Michael Scott once said. So that was the wide receiver talk. I do have a list of handcuffs, guys, because again, I just think that trying to get ahead of the Emanuel Wilsons of the world whenever possible is great, particularly if you're in a situation where you have Josh Allen as your quarterback. You've already dealt with the bye. Like you don't need a second quarterback there. You don't need a second tight end there. God forbid a second DST, unless you're trying to get the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I understand that. So again, the more you can just stash your bench with these handcuffs, that's a situation where they go from being a complete nobody to all of a sudden inside our top 20 and looking like a certified baller flex option. So with that in mind, all these guys are rostered on under 45% of Yahoo leagues right now. Tyler Algier, the most rostered at 45%. So, but God forbid he is out there looking pretty good. Tajay Spears at 38%. Actually got a little bit of flex value. I don't want to start anyone from the Titans either, but God forbid something happen to Tony Pollard. We have seen Spears do big things before. Bashaw Tootin, 30%, someone who did suffer the ankle injury, but he said after the game it actually wasn't too serious. So good news there. And while I don't think a takeover is coming from ETN, it was a nice bump up in usage. And again, there's this huge contingent upside, even regardless of all that. Brian Robinson at 28%. Again, one CMC hangnail away from potentially being the complete feature back of Kyle Shanahan's offense. We have always loved that. Tank Bigsby at 21%, Blake Corum at 17%, Emanuel Wilson at 8%, and Keaton Mitchell at 3% for you super skank leaguers out there. So again, Freeman, you were talking before, again, just about the top tier handcuffs, the guys that actually get in the featured roles in good offenses. For me, trying to prioritize these, I think it's Brian Robinson, Blake Corum, and Bashaw Tootin would be the 3 I really want to come away with.
Corum specifically is really intriguing because he is close to standalone value right now. And that Rams offense has just been an absolute juggernaut for like the past 8 games or so. And if Kyren Williams were to suffer an injury, I don't think there's any question that Blake Corum would inherit a large majority of that workload. So Corum, I agree with your list. Corum for me is probably at the top.
I'm with you because Brian Robinson wouldn't be soaking up the pass down work. I think it'd be more like a kind of borderline RB1, a la like Jordan Mason or Elijah Mitchell in past years. Still very good to have, don't get me wrong. But Blake Corum, like that's a situation where right now, guys, Kyren Williams has been this borderline RB1. But we could honestly be crossing off Kyren and then moving Corum up even higher because he wouldn't have, the same sort of split likely with Jarquez Hunter or whoever else Sean McVay decides to be that backup. So good stuff. Again, Blake Corum will go ahead and go number 1 handcuff there, followed by Bashaw Tootin and Brian Robinson really are the best guys to get on your rosters. Also, don't forget about Tyler Algier, Tajay Spears, Tank Bigsby, Emanuel Wilson, and Keaton Mitchell. So good stuff there, Freedman. Now let's get to some of the biggest performances of Week 11 and play a game of Real or Fugazi. Freedman mentioned a performance previously, but Michael Wilson, guys, 15 catches for 185 yards on a whopping 18 targets. It was the highest single game receiving mark of the season. And he still is only rostered in 47% of Yahoo leagues. So a little bit of this is going to depend, I think, on the status of Marvin Harrison Jr., who obviously had the appendicitis procedure last week, Freedman. But man, right now in my ranks, without Marv in them, I got Michael Wilson as a wide receiver 22. And as insane as that would sound to me a week ago, man, ranking them ahead of guys like DK Metcalf, Wan'Dale Robinson, Juwan Jennings, Alec Pierce, Tez, the Packers wide receivers. I think it's warranted right now with the way Jacoby's cooking and with how good Michael Wilson looked out there.
Yeah. I mean, if I had to say, is this real or is it a fugazi? Like, obviously, we don't expect 180 yards per week from Michael Wilson for the rest of the season. But to your point, I mean, he is out there all the time running routes. An 85% route rate is what he has over the past 4 games, a 21% target rate in those, or target share rather, in those games. And so he actually ends up getting a decent amount of usage. The problem for his career to this point is that he hasn't really been efficient at turning opportunities into production. But man, he looked great, especially in contested catch situations, which, you know, can be up and down. But as long as Jacoby Brissett is back there at quarterback, even with the eventual return of Marvin Harrison, maybe something has kind of shifted in the way that Michael Wilson is approaching the game, the way that the team is kind of looking at him as a potential playmaker. So I wouldn't say like I'm full blown like low end wide receiver 2 on him yet, but he now has my attention as someone who could really move up the ranks if we see that the usage is persisting and that he is more efficient at converting his opportunities into production.
Had your curiosity, but now he has your attention. I guess the thing for me is like we also have Zay Jones out of the picture. And just with this Cardinals offense that continues to get even more banged up running backs, like we have actually seen them throwing the football at a top 6 rate in terms of drop back rate over expected with Jacoby under center. So yeah, you know, once Marv comes back, certainly not going to be ranking him inside the top 24. I get it. But even then, still could be a legit wide receiver 3 if we continue to see Jacoby Brissett throwing for 314 yards a game, which again is wild, but is actively happening. What a time to be alive. Freeman also got to give a shout out to Buccaneers RB Sean Tucker, still only rostered in 27% of Yahoo leagues, 106 yards on the ground with 2 scores, also chipped in 34 more yards through the air, and yes, a 3rd touchdown for good measure. So again, this depends on Bucky Irving. Is he going to be able to return for Sunday night or not? I guess I would just wonder, Freeman, because it looked real to me, and we saw the coaches already increasing Tucker's, I guess, workload alongside Rachaad White. We've heard Todd Bowles saying, you know, as well as more of a pain tolerance thing with Bucky. Can he take contact with the shoulder? I'm a little worried that Bucky comes back and all of a sudden we have a 3-prong committee here. I'm not so sure Bucky's going to be getting that workhorse rollback, at least in the short term in his first couple of games. So I think Sean Tucker's performance was real enough to potentially limit the upside of Bucky once he is back in the picture. Do I think he's going to be taking away Bucky's job? No, of course not. But man, it looked real. And again, I just think that the Buccaneers could be a bit more cautious with Bucky than his fantasy managers would prefer.
I think that's right. And to the point of what this backfield looks like with Sean Tucker and potentially Bucky Irving when he returns, man, I want to see Sean Tucker get more of a workload, but they have not given him the workload when Bucky Irving has been healthy. In fact, he's just normally been like a healthy scratch or a special teams player. And so I will be curious to see what that split looks like. But if Bucky Irving misses another game, I think it is Sean Tucker who really is the lead back much more than Rachaad White at this point. And that's pretty exciting because Sean Tucker, when he has gotten opportunities, he has maximized them throughout his career. Like, and we have seen that multiple times the past 2 seasons with the Buccaneers, where he has multiple games of 100 yards and 3 touchdowns. I mean, like that has happened. So actually, I misspoke, but multiple games of 100 yards and multiple touchdowns. So I'm just excited about what he could do one more week if Bucky Irving is out. But maybe Bucky Irving investors don't want to see that because that could maybe muddy the backfield. But I'm excited for Sean Tucker, and I do think like he is a legit NFL player.
I have Bucky out of my ranks right now. And with that, I have Sean Tucker as my RB25 and Rashad White as my RB30. So again, I am going Tucker over White based on what we've seen last week, but then even the 2 weeks before when things were starting to get a bit more close in terms of the touch department. So I know RB25 might not seem super high, but that is ahead of guys like Tyrone Tracy, David Montgomery, Zach Charbonnet, Bam Knight. I just couldn't quite get myself to move him ahead of Kenneth Walker going up against the Titans. And then guys like Alvin Kamara, Kareem Hunt, Woody Marks, and DeAndre Swift, who I'm just a lot more confident will be clearing 20 touches with ease. But great stuff for Sean Tucker. Hopefully you had him chilling on your bench as well and don't even have to worry about fighting for him in those waiver wire streets. Last one, Freedman, one of those handcuffs we mentioned, Bate, Shaw, Tootin. Yeah, he's got great handcuff upside, but maybe even more because 15 carries for 74 yards and a touchdown on Sunday. As Dwayne outlined in our recap show, it wasn't like we saw a takeover or anything like that. It still was Travis Etienne leading the way in terms of his snaps and routes. Things were just a little bit more even in the carry department, which just could have been, again, a random drive or two of action. But man, this dude has been running hard all season long. One of my favorite stats to look at is not just yards after contact per carry, because sometimes, they break an arm tackle with line of scrimmage. They run for 70. I think that stat can get skewed pretty fast. I like to look at the percentage of carries where a running back gained at least 3 or more yards after contact. Only 3 running backs are over 50% this year. Brian Robinson, Aaron Jones, and yes, Bashaw Tootin. So he's looked explosive with his opportunities. Freedman, and just again, looking at this Liam Cohen-led offense, we've seen him get multiple running backs involved before. There is flex with benefits upside here for Tootin.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. And the encouraging thing with Tootin is that you could look at the final score and say, oh, the Jags won 35-6. Tootin got 15 carries. He must have gotten all of that in the fourth quarter. And the reality is that Tootin, he injured himself with the ankle, left the game early. His work all came in the first half. Like they were mixing him in with Travis Etienne. So I don't think he overtakes Etienne, but it is highly encouraging that he could accumulate the workload that he did while this was still a pretty close game.
Remaining schedule seems winnable enough. Cardinals, Titans, Colts, Jets, Broncos, Colts. Not saying those are all layups or anything like that, but it is kind of a mixture of bad defenses and then offenses that could hopefully turn things into a shootout. So again, Bashaw Tootin, I'm selling the idea that, again, he's going to just be taken over from Travis Etienne. And I've been pretty adamant about that all season long. That does not remove the fact that he is an A-tier handcuff and someone who is great to have stashed on that bench. Again, assuming that ankle injury isn't too serious, but just based on what we heard in the post game, that does seem to be the case. So good news there, everyone. But before we go ahead and put a wrap on this waiver wire edition of the show, let's go back through and just remember some of the pain that we experienced in week 11. It's time for the Sheesh Report. Love wrapping up our Monday show with 2 things that, again, if you weren't exactly grinding every play-by-play data out there, watching every second of every game, perhaps you missed. So we like looking at players who stopped at the 1-yard line and did not score a touchdown in the same drive, as well as unrealized air yards. But first, we're going to get to those sheeshy moments where, again, a player got so close, a mere 3 feet away from scoring, but unfortunately did not, and then proceeded to not score a touchdown in the rest of the drive. Headline this week, guys, by Devon Achane. Happened to him 3 times across 2 separate drives. Ollie Gordon continues to be a nuisance there. Maybe they figure things out during their bye. Also note, Rams running back Blake Corum got stuffed not once, not twice, but 3 times in a row on the same drive, and they actually did go ahead and bring in Kyron Williams after a timeout to go ahead and punch that ball across the goal line. Josh Jacobs and Travis Etienne also had 2 such instances on the same drive. Otherwise, we saw Saquon Barkley, Kyron Williams, Devin Singletary, Chris Rodriguez, Jerry McNichols, Cooper Kupp, Jaden Higgins, Christian Kirk, Elijah Higgins, and the 49ers DST, courtesy of Sky Moore, all get stopped at the 1-yard line and again failed to score a touchdown on the same drive. So the 2 headliners this season, Freedman, Travis Etienne has 7, but that's skewed a little bit because he's had these instances where he's had multiple stops on the same drive. Kyron Williams has 5 though, and they have all been on separate drives. And as much as Blake Corum has been a little bit of a thorn in his side, I think the real issue here has been Matthew Stafford's bromance with Devontae Adams at the goal line. Man, I cannot remember a quarterback just force-feeding a wide receiver from the 1-yard line like Stafford has with Adams. So again, great if you have Devontae Adams or Matthew Stafford on your fantasy team, but been a little bit frustrating for all the Kyron managers out there.
Absolutely. And even with that, even with Matthew Stafford giving the Aaron Rodgers treatment to Devontae Adams, just some unreal stuff, Kyron Williams still has 9 touchdowns in 10 games this year. And that is like right on pace with what he did last year, 16 touchdowns in 16 games. And then the year before that, 15 touchdowns in 12 games. I mean, even with the Devontae Adams kind of pseudo vulture treatment, Kyron Williams is just a touchdown magnet. Like he finds the end zone, and especially with Blake Corum struggling this past week at the goal line, maybe we see a little bit more Kyron Williams usage moving forward. And then I just want to give a call out to Devon Achane, who was at the top of the list there for this past week. Man, Achane is just such a good player, and I know that after his first season, there was kind of the hesitation about like, could he stand up to a full NFL workload? But I mean, this dude has just been awesome. And even though he isn't as efficient now as what we saw out of his like absolutely like stratospheric rookie season where he had like 7.8 yards per carry, he has still just been an absolute monster, and almost 1,300 yards in 11 games is what he has now, and still 9 touchdowns in 11 games. And then, I mean, obviously in the half PPR or full PPR leagues, he has just been a game breaker. 71 targets is what he has so far this season. So, I mean, he's like kind of like a miniature Christian McCaffrey, kind of in terms of like the usage, the workload. And you see that in the utilization report we have on the site, where he's very easily a top 5 running back in terms of the workload that he's getting. So even though sometimes he struggles at the goal line, even though he's in an offense that isn't functioning in totality at a really high level, he as a player has just still been like an absolute league winner. So Devon Achane, even though he didn't convert from the 1 yard line this past week, man, still absolutely love him. And like every week, he's someone that I just feel like, oh, I need to get this guy higher in my rankings.
And it's a good reminder because remember, guys, he had that calf injury in the middle of August and I think scared away a lot of people from drafting him in round 1, maybe like they were before. Not every single ill-timed August injury turns into that 2024 CMC situation where, again, the entire season is lost. So they're all different. I'm not saying just completely fade all injury news in August, but it's good to see Achane healthy and doing his thing. Finally, guys, going to end things with our list of unrealized air yards. Again, this is just trying to put a bit more of a measure behind incomplete targets, okay? Because there's a big difference between me throwing Malik Washington 4 targets into the dirt at the line of scrimmage versus me targeting Jalen Waddle on 4 targets 50 yards downfield. We would like to think the more fantasy-friendly variety of those could lead to bigger and better things in the future. With that said, Freedman, actually a handful, 5, 6 different receivers actually had over 100 unrealized air yards last week, headlined by Troy Franklin at 132, Jordan Addison 123, Amon-Ra St. Brown 122, Roma Dunze, Kyle Williams, and Jamar Chase, rounding out that crew. Also had A.D. Mitchell, Michael Wilson, Devontae Smith, A.J. Brown, and Devontae Adams all really come up high in this metric. So wanted to highlight Troy Franklin because just that downfield connection, Freedman, I've been trying to say it is the worst chemistry I've seen between a quarterback and wide receiver since Mason Rudolph and James freaking Washington, in terms of guys that, again, got to work together in college and just couldn't figure things out at the next level. So Franklin's had some good days this year, but it's almost all been on underneath stuff. He has caught only 2 of 28 targets, thrown at least 30 yards downfield, dating back to last season. And I'm being generous. I'm giving him the touchdown against the Bills in the playoffs. A lesser man, Freeman, wouldn't have included the playoffs. Not me, not today. So that's the second worst downfield rate in the league. The only one worse is actually Jalen Hyatt, who is 0 for 10 over these last 2 years. So Dontavian Wicks, Keon Coleman, A.D. Mitchell, rounding out that unfortunate group. Troy Franklin, Freedman, the guy's earning targets like no others, but man, they cannot connect downfield.
Yeah, you figure at some point it has to turn around. And even with the botched downfield connection, Troy Franklin has still had some games, especially thinking of him going against our Cowboys, where he has put up some fantasy points. So at some point, just given the volume he's getting and the downfield role that he has, there is going to be some serious production in his future. It's just going to be hard week to week to anticipate when that happens.
And with that, everyone, going to wrap up this edition of the Fantasy Live Show. Best of luck to Freedman and his parlay. We'll see what happens between those Cowboys and Raiders. Hope you guys enjoy the Monday Night Football activities, and hope you guys enjoy getting the leg up on your league mates and winning that waiver wire. So for Freedman, for producer Matt, for producer Kelsey, I'm Ian. Thanks again for tuning in. Until next time, take care, everybody.